Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. If you think it doesn't help the channel,
I think you just might have the wrong idea about one or two things.
Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick's 1999 film, is remembered as Kubrick's last film, but rarely his best film. The movie is alienating because the characters are strange and unnatural. When this surreal behavior happens in a movie with mind control, ghosts, or aliens, it seems fitting. But a story that takes place in present-day New York City and revolves around a seemingly real troubled couple but features naked women throwing themselves at men, a protagonist who does nothing heroic, and a final scene that makes no sense, well, that seems like a recipe for a flop. However, Eyes Wide Shut continues to spark discussion, and it fits into Kubrick's canon like a puzzle piece. The movie adapts Arthur Schnitzler's 1926 novella Traumnovelle, or Dream Story, which is considered an example of the Viennese decadent movement. The book and movie are remembered for their depictions of sexual deviancy, but it is woefully insufficient to examine the works on that basis. What is my goal with this essay? If you don't like Eyes Wide Shut because it's a creepy film about creepy men made by a creepy man, I won't change your mind, and that's okay. If you think there needs to be more films like this shown from a woman's point of view, or, hear me out, made by women, then I agree. However, if you think it's a simple-minded film with no deeper meaning, the result of an elderly Kubrick phoning it in, then please keep watching. I will persuade you otherwise. So let's do this. I've watched the movie, I've read the screenplay, I've read the original book, I've blurred out thousands of frames of nipples. I accidentally blurred out Sidney Pollack's nipples, but there's no time for a new render. We're going to answer the question, was it all a dream? And if so, who's the dreamer? Bill Harford seems to be the ideal man. Handsome with a beautiful wife, attractive to almost every woman he meets, a respected doctor in a world where doctor is a respected profession, and possessing enough money to buy almost anything he wants. Bill seems like the kind of man that most men wish they could be, with the major exception that Bill cannot seem to obtain the things he wants in spite of all of his advantages. He has status, but he is unable to achieve the even higher status that his patient Victor Ziegler and his masked cohort seem to have. He comes this close to having sex with beautiful women, but never seems to close the deal. What can we determine from these contradictions? Bill Harford is an ideal man who cannot get the things that a man would ideally want. His good looks, money, and status cannot get him laid. Sex permeates Eyes Wide Shut, but what is Kubrick trying to say about sex in the modern world? Is Kubrick trying to tell us that there are these handsome and charismatic men who cannot get sex? That seems unlikely. Rather, Bill Harford is a means to examine the collective ideal of a successful straight man. That would also be a boring movie, as we would just watch Bill bed a string of attractive women, but in seeing Bill be surrounded by sexually available women that he cannot have, there is a counterbalance to the male fantasy. There is an equilibrium. We see the male fantasy thwarted by, well, something. Bill is a paradox, a successful failure. We see Bill get close to an opportunity for sex and then something goes wrong. Specifically, we see Bill in proximity to at least one sexually available woman. This woman is usually tall, thin, pale white with strawberry blonde hair. Often there is a specific physical threshold that Bill needs to cross to get the sex. Then either Bill is uninterested in sex with this particular woman or something ends the interaction. Sometimes it's a very conspicuous interruption that almost seems comical in how it interrupts the flow of the movie. Let's review. There is no organic introduction to the two models, just boom, there's Bill being flanked on both sides by two traditionally attractive women. It seems that they are carting off Bill for a spontaneous orgy, and considering what's going on upstairs, that's not too surprising. Bill seems to be just as surprised as we are.
Where exactly are we going?
Where the rainbow ends.
Where the rainbow ends.
Don't you want to go where the rainbow ends?
We never learn exactly what "where the rainbow ends" means. It's true that the upstairs, broadly, is where the sex happens.
What did he want? Sex. Upstairs. Then and there.
Also, the costume shop we later see is called The Rainbow, or Under the Rainbow, but this doesn't tell us what the models are talking about. All we know is that if Bill goes to this vaguely defined location called Where the Rainbow Ends, he will get sex. Then, for the first of many times, a lurching manservant changes the direction of the story.
Sorry, Dr. Harford. Sorry to interrupt. I wonder if you could come with me for a moment.
We never hear from Gale and Douala ever again, the first of many loose ends that never get tied up. After the party, we get a naked Bill and Alice beginning foreplay in front of a mirror. Alice looks at herself in the mirror with a look of concern, as if something is wrong. Alice is not satisfied with Bill's lovemaking, and this is the first of many times that Bill fails to live up to the masculine ideal. Then the following night, the two begin formal lovemaking, perhaps a scheduled congress. This ends when Bill upsets Alice and the two begin an argument.
Trying to pick a fight with me, and I don't even know what we're arguing about here.
On top of doing his best impression of me on Reddit, Bill is right. Alice is being antagonistic for no apparent reason. Why? We can start to see how the universe of Eyes Wide Shut diverges from our own, subtly. Is there another reason for Alice's behavior? Do women sometimes act like this, angry for no good reason? Well, yes, I suppose, but more to the point, Alice is acting like a misogynist's ideal of an unreasonable woman.
Because I'm a beautiful woman, the only reason any man ever wants to talk to me is because he wants to fuck me? Is that what you're saying? The reason you wouldn't fuck those two models is out of consideration for me. Not because you really wouldn't want to. Men have to stick it in every place they can, but for women it is just about security and commitment and whatever the fuck else.
In my essay on The Shining, I make the case that the naked woman in the bathroom of room 237 who turns into a ghoul is easy to interpret. She is taunting Jack, humiliating him, so let's assume that she is tormenting him on purpose and go from there. Alice is performing the part of the bitchy, irrational woman. She even frames herself between curtains as if she's on stage. Finally, she tells Bill that, a year ago, when the family was vacationing in Cape Cod, that she seriously considered abandoning him and their daughter to run off with a naval officer. She makes it clear that this was a firm decision. It was only the officer's absence that deterred her from this action. I think that a lot of people misremember this confession because it's so bizarre. She's not admitting to having sex with the officer. She's not admitting to thinking about running off with the officer. The officer himself never gets to have an opinion on the matter. Alice just decided, fuck it, I'm abandoning my family for some rando. This is a very hurtful confession, and when you think about it, the only reason to tell Bill what happened is to hurt him. This happened in her mind, and neither Bill nor anyone would ever know about it if she didn't say anything. Alice is trying to hurt Bill. Sometimes intimate partners say hurtful things they don't mean in the heat of the moment. But this is such a carefully crafted hurtful thing. Moreover, it's ridiculously implausible, and only the serious tone of the film allows us to overlook that. It's like a man's fantasy, or rather nightmare, of an unfaithful woman. I can't imagine how this scene would continue, and I don't have to. The telephone rings and we are whisked off to the next chapter. Bill arrives at the deathbed of his patient Lou Nathanson. He is greeted by Lou's daughter Marion. We, the audience, have no idea who these people are, but note that Marianne is like a replacement Alice. Tall, thin, pale white with strawberry blonde hair. This must be the ideal woman physically to be the counterpart to Bill, the ideal man. The two converse, mainly about Marianne's fiancé Carl, and once again a romantic opportunity falls out of the sky.
I love you. I love you. I love you.
Marion.
I love you. I love you. I don't want to go away with Carl.
We never learn what it is about Bill that makes Marion do this, but there is no good answer to this question.
We barely know each other. I don't think we've had a single conversation about anything except your father.
We barely know Marion, so this context is important. This is coming out of nowhere. Then, like so many scenes in Eyes Wide Shut, this scene is interrupted, this time by the arrival of Carl. Carl looks like he could be Bill's brother. He is another ideal man, just as the many Nicole Kidman-esque women are the ideal woman. It is not merely their looks that mark them as doppelgangers, but their actions as well. Marion is doing what Alice had planned to do, run off with a man she barely knows, abandoning her family. Bill was the recipient of this betrayal in the past, and now it's his doppelganger's turn. At this point, we can start to see the shape of the film's story. There are types of people who do things in cycles. The story takes place in a tragic world where men fail, women fail them, and everything is weird except for the fact that certain internal rules are being obeyed. One of those rules is that women will come out of nowhere to have sex with Bill, and that's exactly what happens after Bill leaves. While Marion's outburst is surprising, sex workers presumably are always trying to attract clients, so it's strangely organic when Domino tries to pick up Bill. Like going to the end of the rainbow, there is a distinct physical threshold to cross to get sex with Domino.
You live in there.
Yes.
Yep, just go through the red doors and sex is on. After discussing price, Bill and Domino start to kiss when Bill's cell phone goes off, as if phones exist in this universe to motivate a change in the direction of the story. It's Alice telling Bill that she's going to bed. Bill now bows out of the activity. It would seem that Bill was reminded of his marital vows and that's what changed his mind. However, the original novel gives us additional insight. There were no cell phones in 1926, so what do you suspect caused the protagonist, Fridolin, from bedding the willing prostitute named Mizzi? That's a good question. If you're like me, you'll read this page over and over again, trying to interpret what's going on. It seems like sex is on and then off. In the 1969 movie, Mizzi changes her mind because Fridolin disgusts her for some reason, and we are left to figure it out for ourselves. The point is that Bill does not get sex because Bill can't get sex. Milich's daughter smiles at Bill. This might not seem like enough to present herself as sexually available, but this is the Eyes Wide Shut universe where women and girls are throwing themselves at Bill. Either Bill is not interested in underage girls, or he's thinking about the legal and moral consequences, or he's afraid of Milich, or any combination of those factors. One overlooked aspect of this scene is the fact that the daughter initiated the tryst with the businessman. We forget this because it's contrary to real life, where it would be more likely that the two adult men would initiate, or more accurately, coerce the sex. Additionally, minors can't legally consent to this, so maybe we don't want to understand that the daughter wanted the sexual experience. Let me be crystal clear. I'm not saying this is realistic. I'm saying that this is what happened in the story. If this seems so unlikely that you're disgusted with Kubrick for letting it happen, even if it is not meant to be taken literally, I understand. Nonetheless, I posit that Kubrick is doing something meaningful. Mysterious Woman is supposed to be Mandy, but I'll refer to her as the script refers to her, simply Mysterious Woman. Mandy and Mysterious Woman are played by two different actresses, so it's not crazy to assume that they are two different women in spite of what Ziegler says. It would seem that Bill and Mysterious Woman are going to have sex, but Mysterious Woman is only interested in Bill's safety.
You are in great danger, and you must get away while there's still a chance.
And once again, a creepy guy enters the frame like he's breaking into the film itself and interrupts the action.
Would you be so good as to excuse us for a moment?
A different courtesan, known only as Young Woman, approaches Bill and tries to pick up where Mysterious Woman left off and promises sex as long as Bill changes his location.
Do you want to go somewhere a little more private?
It would appear that sex is on. Then Mysterious Woman pulls a reverse.
May I borrow him for just a few minutes?
Mysterious Woman tries to convince Bill to leave, but Bill won't do it. This is the first time that Bill is not about to have sex when a random creep interrupts him.
Excuse me, sir.
Bill is brought before the court and exposed. It seems that, even at an orgy, Bill can't get laid. We must note that, after Bill leaves Somerton, he is going back to old places more than discovering new places, and some would-be seducers get a second shot at him. In many ways, the second half of the movie mirrors the first half. He meets Milich's daughter again. Milich has prostituted his own daughter out and invites Bill to take advantage of this new service. The daughter seems strangely okay with this arrangement. This is immoral and implausible. We, the audience, are disgusted, and so is Bill. The erotic tone of the film has radically shifted. The whole idea of sex is repulsive now, and Bill may feel the same way we feel. Sure, sex is great, but if asking your underage daughter is an abomination. In other words, the thing that interrupts this seduction is not a lurching manservant, but Bill's own sensibilities. Does this mean that the two are the same? That a random creep coming into a film to stop the action is a manifestation of Bill's mind? A lot of people puzzle over why Milich changed his mind about the businessmen. Did they offer him so much money that he couldn't say no? Was the anger he expressed at them all a performance? The answer is simpler than that. The anti-erotic tone of the film demands that this scene be sexually repulsive, so it is. This is a mostly forgotten part of the film, but that night, Bill calls Marion. It seems that Bill has reconsidered her offer. I mean, every other avenue for sexual gratification has been cut off, so why not go back to the crazy engaged woman? Carl answers the phone, and Bill hangs up rather than say, "Yeah, your wife totally wants me, put her on please." And this plan is aborted. In the book, Fridolin physically returned to the home of Marianne, the character who is the equivalent of Marion. The two have a stilted conversation that ends with nothing happening. If you like stilted conversations with no resolution, Arthur Schnitzler is your jam. The point is that Bill is pathetic. I guess he was always pathetic, but now he's just returning to missed opportunities because new opportunities are just not possible. And that means a return to Domino. Or so he thinks. Bill returns to Domino's apartment to find Domino's roommate Sally. There is a conspicuous interchangeability of women in Eyes Wide Shut, like any tall, thin, pale white woman with strawberry blonde hair will do. We don't know if Sally is a sex worker, but she is basically inviting Bill to be intimate with her. Of course, some random event has to interrupt this, otherwise it wouldn't be Eyes Wide Shut, and Sally announces that Domino has AIDS. Remember, AIDS was a death sentence back then, so Sally is really saying that Domino is dying.
Maybe I better be going.
One interpretation is that Sally was gung-ho because she either wanted the money or she wanted sex with the impossibly irresistible Bill Harford, and then she slammed on the brakes when she remembered, incorrectly, that Domino had slept with Bill. However, the start and stop of the scene is so erratic that I don't think we have to find realism or naturalism in it. The announcement of Domino's demise is the interruption assigned to this possibility of sexual gratification. The last thing that Alice says to Bill, the last word of the film, is the promise that the two of them will, and then there's only one way that a creepy guy could enter the scene and interrupt this. Most people agree that Eyes Wide Shut does not have a happy ending, that we cannot assume that Bill and Alice have reconciled. Imagine if your partner said, "There's no way of distinguishing fantasy from reality, but right now we're in reality and I don't want to be committed to you and we should have sex." You wouldn't exactly be in the mood. Bill was approached by collectively 9 sexually available women over 10 different occasions. The first 9 times nothing happened. Are we to assume that the 10th time is a charm? That while we're watching the credits, Bill and Alice are happily making love? That seems unlikely. Besides, when has Kubrick made a film with a happy ending? So that's Bill Harford, a man who has traditionally sexually desirable traits and is impossibly irresistible to women, but can't get laid because of fantastic events. I had hinted at the possibility that all or most of what we're seeing isn't real, and most people assume that Bill is imagining some of the events. But you cannot parse the story of Bill Harford into dream and reality. This means that it is meaningless to describe Eyes Wide Shut as Bill's dream, since Bill is as much a part of the story as all the other characters. But if we're not seeing the story through Bill's eyes, then whose eyes are wide shut? There are numerous references to dreams in Eyes Wide Shut. Alice casually references the possibility that all or some of the past events might have been a dream. Say what?
We've managed to survive through all of our adventures, whether they were real or only a dream. I just had such a horrible dream.
It's only a dream.
Daughter Helena wants to watch a story famous for being the dream of a young girl.
Can I stay up and watch the Nutcracker? Before me, when I jump into my bed.
In the original novel, Schnitzler drops several clues that Fridolin is walking into a different reality, or feels that he is.
"What did you say?" asked Nachtigall, as if coming out of a dream. He laughed, and he heard himself laughing as in a dream. Well, it was there the dream began. I was entering this house, like an actress stepping onto the stage. He was moving farther and farther away from his everyday existence into some strange and distant world.
However, we have to take a second and select more precise language. Eyes Wide Shut is not a literal dream. To explain this distinction, let's look at Mulholland Drive. It's pretty uncontroversial that the first 3/4 of the film is a dream, and we see the reality when the protagonist, Diane Selwyn, wakes up. But what she imagined is not a literal dream. It's too complex and lucid with a linear plot running through it, and it reveals her inner thoughts more clearly than a real dream. In spite of what dubious dream analysis might say, dreams are a lot of random nonsense. I call the kind of story that Eyes Wide Shut is a confabulation. All dreams are confabulations, but not all confabulations are dreams. So, to describe a story that is the construction of an auxiliary character, I will use this word. I know it seems pretentious to introduce an obscure Latin word into the discussion, but no other word is accurate. Confabulations happen when you are awake, but they are dreamlike, so I think it fits the title Eyes Wide Shut, a title that prompts a paradoxical state of being awake and asleep at the same time. Eyes Wide Shut is a confabulation. But who is the confabulator? Bill Harford? In Mulholland Drive and other movies with similar structure, we see the confabulator protagonist in the waking world, and this is distinct from the confabulation. In movies like Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, Carnival of Souls, and Jacob's Ladder, we discover that the protagonist has died, and this lets us know that the movie has been taking place in someone's head, producing a twist ending. However, the confabulator is still identifiable. P.S. These movies are decades old, so don't write a nasty comment that I spoiled it for you. Bill Harford is exclusively in the confabulation. He is a handsome leading man played by a handsome leading man. In fact, according to screenwriter Frederick Raphael, his last name Harford is a contraction of Harrison Ford, after whom the character was modeled. This means that Bill Harford is a manufactured self-image of the confabulator. This is why Bill is such a strange, almost inhuman figure. Amy Nicholson described this in her book on Tom Cruise.
The whole film feels like an exercise in theatricality, as though Dr. Bill is not a person, but a prop. This isn't a movie about a human possessed with distrust and jealousy. It's a movie about distrust and jealousy that simply uses a human as its conduit.
Nicholson defends the seemingly wooden acting of Cruise, which she calls right instead of good, by claiming that he's playing a thing instead of a person. I agree with Nicholson, but she doesn't go far enough. I would argue that every character is a thing instead of a person. At a certain point, the line between thing and person starts to blur. Milich happily points out that the mannequins look alive, as if explaining the nature of the characters in Eyes Wide Shut.
Looks like alive, huh?
Yes. It's wonderful.
Of course, this still doesn't answer the question of who the confabulator is. Let's build a profile. I believe that I have made this clear in Chapter 1. The confabulator wishes to be handsome, rich, and upper class in terms of status and money, and he believes that this is sufficient to get him sex. But he cannot get sex because the confabulator doesn't understand sex. When Bill straight up asks Domino for a list of the sexual acts they will do, she says this:
I'd rather not put it into words.
Domino refuses to enumerate the sex acts for which she is available. I don't know if this is how sex workers do things. Are they coy, or do they give you an itemized list like you're a Jiffy Lube? But what if the confabulator doesn't understand sex well enough for his imagined character to produce a list of realistic sex acts? This is what she would say. Once we get to the Somerton mansion, the sex acts are largely performative. Some people are doing realistic sex acts, but more people are watching than participating. Sex is portrayed as something you observe rather than something in which you participate. This is how sex would be thought of by someone who is a virgin but has watched a lot of porn. In fact, a lot of these performances are taken directly from popular tropes in adult films. And what else happens in sexual fantasies for men? The women are always ready, willing, and able. It's not really a sexual fantasy for straight men if the women are ambivalent or the men have to put in the work to seduce them. This explains the sequence of horny women coming after Bill. It also explains why women turn into scornful bitches.
When she is having her little titty squeezed, do you think she ever has any little fantasies about what handsome Dr. Bill's dicky might be like?
When Alice adopts childish language, this could be interpreted as the childish confabulator starting to talk in his own voice. The dialogue between Bill and Alice could easily be read as a monologue that someone who doesn't know about sexual mores is having with himself, the blind leading the blind. What kind of a doctor is Bill? He's someone who is a doctor, not someone who does doctor.
You know what they say. Once a doctor, always a doctor.
Nobody says that. But in this world, being a doctor is an essence, an immutable characteristic.
I happen to be a doctor.
It's okay, I'm a doctor.
And what makes someone a doctor? Let's see if Bill gives the most vague answer possible.
Oh, they are very knowledgeable about all sorts of things.
You know, knowledge. You're a doctor if you know doctor things. For Bill, being a doctor means having access to different parts of society. He gets invited to Ziegler's party and into Ziegler's trust because he's a doctor.
Why do you think Ziegler invites us to these things every year?
This is what you get for making house calls.
Bill's credentials get him access to anything as if it's a cop's badge.
I really am Dr. Harford. This is my New York State Medical Board card.
The badge gets information from the waitress. The badge gets information from the hotel clerk. The badge gets him into the morgue. Let's remember that the very first line of the movie is,
Honey, you see my wallet?
Talk about an identity crisis. Bill is nothing without that ID. And how does Bill practice medicine? He goes to a dead man and touches his forehead. Yeah, you wouldn't want to be dead and have a fever. He has a traditionally attractive woman with full breasts completely disrobed so that he can check her heart with a stethoscope. Since doctors get to see naked women, this is a naive imagining of such an event. He deals with a drug overdose by telling the victim essentially, hey, don't die. You could argue that he is restrained from doing the responsible thing and calling an ambulance or perhaps transporting her to a hospital since Ziegler wants to keep it quiet. But Bill's not displaying any kind of medical knowledge. And the other characters talk about his doctorness in weird terms.
You still in the doctor business?
It's an immature and naive person's concept of a doctor. You'd almost think that this is the confabulation of, well, a child. Film critic James Nairmore said it's
as if volcanic, almost infantile feelings were being observed in a lucid, rational manner.
Take out as if. The confabulator is childish. This is one of the single most important and overlooked aspects of Eyes Wide Shut. We follow adult and sophisticated Manhattanites, and Stanley Kubrick is a genius who makes films for sophisticated adults, right? Maybe. But the movie is mired in the puerile. I think a lot of analysis of Eyes Wide Shut fails because it doesn't acknowledge this. And what's the typical child's favorite time of year? There have been reams of essays about how Christmas iconography is everywhere in Eyes Wide Shut, but no references to the Christian religion. The only time religious practices are even alluded to is when the Red Cloak begins a ceremony with a censer, and this happens in the only location with no Christmas iconography. When I was a kid, I didn't care about all that religious stuff, and I was a choir boy. I wanted presents. Lots of presents. The kind that Helena seeks. The kind of immaculately wrapped presents that a sex worker keeps in the tub next to a sink in her apartment's kitchenette. Okay, maybe a sex worker would get into the Christmas spirit like this, but doesn't it seem more logical that presents are just appearing in random places by a storyteller who isn't in control of his story? So many of the mysteries of Eyes Wide Shut are explained if you assume that a person with limited knowledge is constructing this reality. Milich has an office that locks from the outside. Nick plays the piano, but no piano is heard. It's possible that the violin parts of the song are synthesized, but then just get a violinist or a recording. It's also possible that a group of adult men would harass another adult man with disgusting homophobic slurs, but doesn't this seem like the sort of thing that a group of kids would do to another kid? When Bill orders an adult beverage, he says,
"I like a beer."
You know, a beer, just any beer. There is champagne at the Ziegler party, but let's say hypothetically that someone knows just enough about high society to know that they would have champagne, but not enough to know what kind of food they would have. They would imagine a lavish party with absolutely no food whatsoever. The Somerton orgy has neither food nor drinks. Conversely, things that a child would know are all represented properly. The toy store has real toys. The young boy is getting his neck glands checked the way a real doctor would do it.
Looking forward to Christmas.
And no, I'm not saying that this kid is the confabulator. I'm saying that all the evidence points to Eyes Wide Shut being a confabulation of an immature boy. Those of you who are skeptical, and I always encourage skepticism, might be saying, wait a minute, Hammer, those are all cherry-picked examples. Yeah, well, what's the countervailing evidence? When does Eyes Wide Shut show mature ideas that only a fully developed adult could have? Alice and Zavos talk about Ovid, but they both demonstrate a superficial understanding. Zavos is an unsophisticated boy's idea of a sophisticated man.
He has a wonderful collection of Renaissance bronzes.
Just Renaissance bronzes, generally. Also, you have to counter this with the batshit crazy things that Zavos says.
You know why women used to get married, don't you? It was the only way they could lose their virginity and be free to do what they wanted with other men.
What? Who believes this? Who professes this? This is something said by an adult as imagined by a child. So who is the confabulator? I don't know. Wait, Mr. G, come back. I'm not done yet. Let me explain why we cannot give a name and face to the confabulator, and then explain his existence as best I can. If we pulled out like the last episode of St. Elsewhere to see that it was all in the mind of a kid, then sure, my theory would be rock solid. But there is absolutely nothing in the text that identifies this very hypothetical child. However, the text clearly identifies that the story is the creation of an undeveloped mind. So where do we go from here? We'll stop looking at all of the minute and obscure moments from Eyes Wide Shut and look at the most famous scene. I had made the case that the characters in Eyes Wide Shut are symbolic. They are abstractions in human form. If we were to make them more abstract, we could simplify the humans. We could take away their faces. This is the purpose of the masks. The orgy scene is one level more abstract than the rest of the film. When you look at these creepy masks, you may notice your brain is kind of resetting every so often. They are terrifying faces, and you have to remind yourselves that they are real humans wearing weird masks. You have to remind yourselves that we have not descended into a world of uncanny ghouls. Maybe we have. Think of the cantina scene from Star Wars. The scene is upbeat and fun because there is a context for a bunch of monsters to be present. If Bill walked into Somerton and there were literal monsters there, the film would be such a radically different work that we would sort of rage quit, voluntary suspension of disbelief abandoned. However, if they are merely masks, meaning that there is a logical explanation for the frightening visages, then we accept it. Or rather, we are forced to accept it. Who is the Red Cloak? There are several essays claiming to unmask the character, literally. Most people think it's Victor Ziegler, but the truth is that there's nothing to reveal. The Red Cloak is the Red Cloak. He is accusatory, judgmental, and dangerous, not because a real human being under the mask has those attributes, but because he is accusation, judgment, and danger personified. The Red Cloak is the personification of rejection, and look at his friends. The personification of shock, the personification of shame, the personification of, wow, I've never seen that sex act before. There's a single word for that emotion in German. I'm reminded of the Masks episode of The Twilight Zone. I imagine that if you removed anyone's mask, they'd have the same face underneath. And what of the mysterious woman? Later in the film, Victor Ziegler confirms that it was Mandy.
The woman lying dead in the morgue was the woman at the party.
Yes.
But was it? It's not that we can't trust Ziegler. We can't, but that's not the point. We can't trust anything since there's no object permanence in the film. Everything keeps shifting around. Remember, Mandy and Mysterious Woman are played by two different actresses, which is evidence that they are two different characters, in spite of what Ziegler says. Why did Mysterious Woman sacrifice her life for Bill, assuming she did? It was because, as Mandy, Bill saved her life, right? Well, she would have been grateful for that, but so grateful that she willingly sacrifices her life for Bill? That seems unlikely. Or maybe Ziegler was telling the truth and it was all a sham.
All of that was staged. That it was a kind of charade. It was fake. To scare the living shit out of you. To keep you quiet about where you'd been and what you'd seen.
Well then, there is still no motivation for Mysterious Woman. She's grateful to Bill, so she's going to run a con on him? That doesn't make sense either. If Mysterious Woman is concerned for Bill and willing to do anything to protect him, even die for him, then Mysterious Woman represents the concept of woman protecting man. These faceless beings are what they appear to be, and everything else is just post-hoc rationalization. The Somerton scene comes to an end when Bill is discovered. If you're familiar with imposter syndrome, we are seeing the worst nightmare of someone afflicted with the neurosis. Bill, who seeks status, thought he could fake his way into a higher class, but he could not because he does not have the essence of class, and the personification of rejection rejects him. Now we know that none of this is real. If the Somerton Group is willing to kill somebody to protect their secrets, what sense does it make to have a rule that a proxy can take the place of a condemned man? Bill is to be killed so he won't say anything, right? How does killing someone else advance that goal? It does not. However, there is a thread of man controlling woman running through Eyes Wide Shut, man owning woman, and woman performing traditional gender roles. This is the logical conclusion of this relationship. If man is above woman, then let woman go to the chopping block. And this is the society that the confabulator dreams of, a place where women do the work, serve man, and ultimately die for man. The important thing is that Bill is in love with Mysterious Woman. He refuses to leave, not because he doesn't trust her warnings, but because he won't leave without her.
Will you come with me?
That's impossible.
Why?
Because it could cost me my life, and possibly yours.
Of course Bill wants to run away with her. This is a world where people routinely fall in love with strangers and consider abandoning their lives and running away with them. Mysterious Woman is an abstraction, just like the naval officer was an abstraction to Alice. We do see the naval officer in Bill's imagination, but these events never took place, and Bill never saw the officer. He doesn't even know what he looks like, so this generic handsome man is just as abstract as Mysterious Woman. In other words, Bill doesn't fall in love with a woman, he falls in love with woman. Along with Bill, the only real person at the party was Ziegler.
I was there, at the house. I saw everything that went on.
We never learn which one he was, but if he was a specific masked man, the Red Cloak or Tricorn Man or whomever, then the logic would be broken. If Somerton is one level below the rest of the narrative in abstraction, then Ziegler wasn't one person but several of them. Ziegler, a powerful man, represents all powerful people, and the masked men collectively represent powerful people. I'm not saying that Ziegler split up into multiple beings like a Manhattanite Voltron. I'm saying that you cannot draw a one-to-one correspondence between the Somerton world and the Manhattan world. The Somerton men were non-people without identities who exist in a dream, and the dream would be ended if they were normal people. Or, to put it another way,
those were not just ordinary people there. If I told you their names, I don't think you'd sleep so well.
Is Mandy's death merely a coincidence? Well, there can't really be coincidences in an entirely constructed story, so no. Bill is investigating the Somerton Group. He is a detective, and a detective needs clues. The third act of the movie sees our protagonist, who is trying to get laid, become a more traditional protagonist who tries to solve a mystery. But how do you solve a mystery with no solution? After After Bill is chased out of the Somerton mansion, he returns to find that Alice had a nightmare. Well, mostly a nightmare. She's actually laughing. We learn that it was frightening and pleasurable at the same time. Of course, Alice is a pile of contradictions. Alice dreamt that she was having sex with multiple men and mocking Bill while it happened. In other words, she dreamt of an event that would have tormented Bill if it happened. In the book, wife Albertina dreamt that Fridolin was whipped and crucified while she mocked him. I guess Kubrick thought that was a little too much. However, Bill is tormented by a woman he desires and men he cannot equal in the dream, and in the dream within the dream. The guy can't get a break. I would hypothesize that the confabulator is desperately trying to change the narrative. So far, Bill has been a failure. But what kind of success would make it all worth it? What about fighting back and winning? What about investigating the Somerton Group? Uncovering the truth and being a hero? Now Tom Cruise's casting makes more sense, as he typically plays a protagonist who heroically uncovers a conspiracy, like in A Few Good Men, The Firm, and Mission Impossible. In the novel, this is more obvious. Fridolin wants to take vengeance against the people who wronged him and have them faithfully reported. In the movie, Bill merely wants answers. He'll ask Nightingale. Nope, he's gone. But the hotel clerk gives him some clues. He'll go back to the Somerton mansion, like maybe the super secret group will be casually hanging out on the front lawn and he can just chat with them. Well, anyway, I don't know what he thought was going to happen, but he gets a written warning. The text is almost identical to the text in Traum Novelle. Consider these words a second warning. We don't know what Bill is thinking, but this warning seems to encourage him rather than discourage him. This is not mysterious in Traum Novelle. Fridolin assumes that the use of the phrase second warning instead of final warning is a tacit invitation to keep playing the game.
Zweite Warnung, nicht letzte. Noch eine Prüfung? Es liegt an mir, sie zu finden.
He is correct. After all, if the confabulator is creating this mystery for the protagonist's benefit, then a story suited to the protagonist will happen. The confabulator is turning the story into a mystery story. There's even an antagonist now, the creepy stalker who follows Bill. The point is that I don't buy the theories that Eyes Wide Shut is about paranoia. I think that Bill is subtly relieved to have an enemy to fight. This is a collaborator, not an adversary. Bill's attempt to escape the stalker prompts the next story beat. A good mystery story could benefit from a mysterious death, so Bill just happens to grab a random newspaper and flip to the page that just happens to report the suspicious death of Mandy. Using his incredible doctor superpowers, he finds Mandy's body in the morgue and leans in for a kiss. He stops himself, of course, but the point is that he is still in love with Mysterious Woman. Remember, Mysterious Woman is an abstraction, a faceless character. Perhaps he has fallen out of love with the abstraction now that it has a face. Her being dead isn't a deterrent to his brief romantic swooning. If this was a typical mystery story, Bill would try to find some forensic evidence to prove she was murdered, or follow up on some other leads. But no, Ziegler calls him up, convinces him to stop the investigation, and that's it. Our hero accepts that his foe is too powerful, and he gives up. Imagine if Mission Impossible ended like that. So, did the Somerton Group kill Mandy? This is one of the most often asked questions about Eyes Wide Shut, and I know you turn to these essays for concrete answers, but the question itself is meaningless. There are no off-screen events. Everything happens for Bill's benefit. Mandy is dead so that Bill can follow the clues. If the confabulator wants the Somerton Group to be guilty, they are. If the confabulator wants Ziegler to be telling the truth, then he is. The only way to answer the question is for Bill to continue the investigation, which he doesn't, so there is no answer. When he comes home, Bill finds the mask on his pillow. This could be interpreted as a threat leveled by the Somerton Group against Bill, or maybe Bill and his family. If they can get in and out of the apartment without being detected, then they can do anything, right? But this ignores the fact that the confabulator can move things and do whatever he wants, really. Is he trying to give the mask to Bill and tell him to give it another shot? Try being a more abstract and higher status being again? Or is it a warning to Bill that it won't work? I don't know. What's for sure is that Bill knows that he cannot win. I'm not talking about his battle against evil. Bill cannot be the thing that the confabulator wants him to be, and therefore the confabulator cannot be that person in real life. So, there's nothing to do but break down in tears. The storyteller is wiser, if sadder. I I've made the case that Eyes Wide Shut is a complex narrative created by a naive adolescent with little knowledge of the real world and a nascent hatred of women. And if I have persuaded you of this, then the question remains, who is this person? Sure, there is no character inside the movie who is a candidate for the confabulator, but what about outside the movie? Let's think about the audience for movies in general. We have children, adults, and adults who may as well be children. You know the type. The audience is made up of men, women, non-binary people, people of all races, gay, lesbian, and bisexual people. In Hollywood, the filmmakers are trying to predict what this group wants in a movie. Well, not the entire group. The decision-making process assumes that anyone worth catering to is a straight man. And you can also exclude most people of color. And you can also exclude anyone with emotional intelligence, regardless of age. We are left with straight men, mostly white, who are so ignorant of the real world that they may as well be children. Hollywood seeks to understand this group and give them what they want, and they do. This is why the 80s and 90s gave us so many bad, childish, misogynist films. Now let's reverse this cycle. Let's have this group make the story instead of consuming it. They see the story that they are creating, and they need to constantly do erratic course corrections because the protagonist is no longer a smirking, competent hero that always comes out on top. Their little experiment has failed. They have created an anti-fantasy. Now imagine that this group is invisible, and Kubrick films the film that they are making. Kubrick is bringing this story to us without providing the proper context, that it is a story within a story. This is Eyes Wide Shut, and the confabulator is the demographic for whom films are made. Eyes Wide Shut is a film made by the lowest common denominator instead of for the lowest common denominator. The very first image is a naked woman who is clearly nude for the benefit of the viewer. What better way to announce who the movie is being made for? The audience imagines themselves as Bill Harford, a handsome and successful man, a Tom Cruise type. We just need our identification so that we can adopt this fantasy. I'm not going to go through the whole movie, but if you do it, you'll notice that things happen as the story is created, like improv. If Bill and his beautiful wife are going out, and if they have at least one child, like any respectable couple, then there must be a babysitter. But the confabulator got over his skis on this one.
What's the name of the babysitter?
Ross.
Since the confabulator doesn't know the difference between diegetic and non-diegetic music, Bill turns off the soundtrack itself. Then we see the story take the form of male fantasy, but because the confabulator lacks the knowledge of success in the real world, sexually or otherwise, those gaps in his knowledge keep causing the story to spin out of control. Bill continually readjusts his actions to keep up with a universe gone mad, but it's never enough. In the end, the confabulator wants to break out of this dream, and Bill's wife, the popular image of woman, not a real woman, promises this.
We're awake now, and hopefully for a long time to come.
But if this wasn't a dream, she would say something more realistic than suggesting that the two of them
fuck.
The cycle continues. The lowest common denominator will always be catered to, and this kind of story will be told by men to men
forever.
Eyes Wide Shut is a repellent film. I understand why people don't like it, but hopefully I made the case that Kubrick was trying to convey how repellent mainstream society is. I suppose that showing off the terrible things in reality in an unreal way is Kubrick's signature style. Kubrick paints the picture of man in crisis, stuck in a cycle of privilege and failure. In other films like Dr. Strangelove, Clockwork Orange, The Shining, and Full Metal Jacket, his man avatars turn to violence, but the capacity to do violence, however immoral, still shows a character being successful on some level. Bill is unsuccessful. There is no action in Eyes Wide Shut, and casting an action star to be defeated without a fight is a great way to signify this. I don't think that Eyes Wide Shut is a message film. But if I was to ferret out a message, it would be a message to straight men. If you dream of a world where women are objects, where privilege is owed to you, where seeking status is heroic, then it's time to wake up.